वो कर ठीक है, ये है इधर एक्टिविटी में। ओके,
और ये चेंज
वेट अ सेकेंड। ये खोले से ऊपर कर।
स्क्रीन चेंज क्या क्या चाहिए? ये चाहिए। पोस्टर तो खुला हुआ है बट हमें जब स्लाइड शो दिखाना होगा तो सब फ्रीज मत कर, ऐसे ही रहना, ये चेंज भी करना होगा ना। कर दो, मुझे नहीं आता करना।
वो तो उससे आपको प्रॉब्लम होगा। लाइव स्ट्रीमिंग में क्या प्रॉब्लम आ रही है आपको?
तो कुछ नहीं है।
वो तो शेयर कर लेंगे ना, तो शेयर कर लेंगे पीपीटी जब चलाएंगे। पीपीटी कौन सी है आपकी? ये
जी उधर
ठीक है,
History shows where ethics and economics come in conflict. Victory is always with economics. Vested interests have never been known to have willingly divested themselves unless there was sufficient force to compel them. This quote by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is truly a powerful testament. In today's ever-evolving world, this message resonates as a timeless reminder of the importance of education in shaping a just and equitable society. A hearty greeting to everyone present here on behalf of the conference, the Economics Association of Ramaprasad Mukherjee College for Women. I, Shivadakya Pandey, a third-year economics honors student, would like to welcome you all to today's event. Conference. The Economics Association of Ramaprasad Mukherjee College for Women gives students an ideal environment to showcase their talents and intelligence. Through workshops, seminars, and competitions, the conference equips students with deep insights about critical topics of economics. These activities have boosted students' self-esteem and allowed them to focus on positive interests. The conference empowers students to excel in their economic pursuits and beyond. The light of the lamp is a symbol of hope, peace, and prosperity. Therefore, before beginning the event, I request our esteemed guest, Dr. Ambedkar, Ma'am, PIC, Dr. Jyotsna Ma'am, to please come forward for the lighting of the lamp. I also request our place Dr. Shubhasina Ma'am to please come forward. Now that Dina Ma'am come forward and felicitate our esteemed guest of honor, Dr. Ambedkar. Yes, Dr. Jyotsna ma'am, to participate. Now I would like to request Dr. Subhas. I would humbly request Renu ma'am to please come forward and say a few words.
A very warm welcome to all of you present here, especially the guest of today's event, who is going to deliver a lecture on the topic, which is about the Ambedkar. We know about his contribution in the Constitution, but about his contribution in economic area, there are very few people who know about it. So it's a very relevant topic for particularly the students of economics. So we are thankful to the guest of the today for sparing the time and coming to address our students. I hope that this session will be a very good session, a very informative session for all the students. So all the best for today's session, and we won't take too much time. I would like to hear the guest for today's session. Thank you.
And now I request Dipali ma'am to take the stage and proceed with the event.
A very good morning to everyone who all are present here. On behalf of Economics Department, I, Dipali, feel honored to welcome all those who are present here for the special lecture on economic thoughts of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in collaboration with our IQ. It is with great pleasure that I extend my warm welcome to our esteemed guest of honor, Professor Amit Thorat, renowned for his expertise in economics, education, writing, and currently serving as a professor of economics at esteemed Jawaharlal Nehru University. Prior to this, he has also worked as Associate Fellow at National Council for Applied Economic Research, New Delhi, where he was a part of India's Human Development Survey team. He has also worked with ICAR National Institute, the International Food Policy Research Institute, the South Asian Headquarters in New Delhi, and Economic Research Foundation, New Delhi. While there is certainly a lot to say about Professor Thorat, but I would let his words define him and illuminate his character. Today, Professor Thorat will be sharing his insights on the economic thoughts of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. We all know that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar played a pivotal role in India's constitutional process making, and he also possessed extensive expertise in his contribution is extensive in economic domain as well, like labor economics, health, public finance policies, economic development and planning especially. So without any delay, I would like to invite Professor Thorat to share his profound insights and enlighten the eager minds gathered here today. I would like to invite his son on the podium.
Good morning, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be invited here. So I must thank profusely Jyotsna, the Economic Department, and the principal and other people who have organized this event and other events I hear are happening. So thank you so much. I hope I can, within the given time, I can share certain thoughts with you, which I'm also engaging with myself. It's a constant process of learning. So yeah, uh, we have been trying to fix a date, and usually it's around 14th April that we try to do it, but because of other engagements, I couldn't come earlier, so I apologize for that. And I finally managed to find some time to come visit your very beautiful campus, extremely beautiful campus. I must congratulate you all for this space, a very nice academic space. Uh, it is such a contrast from the city outside. So let me get right into it because I don't have much time. I'm going to talk about, I mean, we know Dr. Ambedkar as he was the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution, and many of the members were missing or ill or something, so the burden fell on him to draft and write and think about the Constitution. And in state and minorities, which he had already written, which was like a precursor to the Constitution, it was his own Constitution. And he would have liked a lot of that to come into the original Constitution that we have today. Sadly, that didn't happen. So when the Constitution was presented, he made the statement, which is very famous, that I'll be the first one to reject this Constitution because it's not as radical as he would have liked it to be. But apart from his contribution as the guiding light for India's democracy and constitution, he was also, excuse me, uh, he was also responsible in the early planning stages of the Indian economy. He was the first person to go abroad and get a PhD. There was another person, but he was the first one to go abroad, did his master's and PhD from Columbia University. I think in 1913 to 14, 15, he did his master's, and then 15 to 16, he did his PhD at Columbia. Then he went to LSE to do his doctorate of science. And he also got a barrister at law degree, as well as went to Germany for some further studies. So at that time, he was probably the most educated person we can think of. And he was exposed to brilliant academicians and thinkers like John Dewey at Columbia, and that heavily influenced his thinking and his vision for the nation and people. John Dewey was a mentor and a friend for him. So this is what I just said. So early writings of Ambedkar, after during he was doing his PhD, and once he finished and came back to India, his early writings were on the subjects of economics, as one can understand. Public finance, monetary international economics, and during focusing on the colonial period and the colonial rule. His PhD was on the rupee, and which was published as the problem of rupee in India and the solutions. So he was looking at how the artificially maintained exchange rate by the British was helping in the or helping them in an adverse trade relation with India, which led to their trade surplus being at the cost of ours. So that is where he started his PhD work from. Later on, his writings covered a wide range of interrelated issues, such as perspectives on economic development, planning, economic systems, political economy, and of course, caste. He presented his first findings on annihilation of caste when he was in the US, and he was invited present that paper, but when the organizers realized, who were Indian uh, community in US, that this is something talking about caste, they rejected his paper and presentation, which he published later. Uh, so I'm going to talk a little bit about him as a policymaker. Uh, uh, when he came to India, he also uh, was given the charge, even before independence, when you had a um, constitutional committee with the British in power, he had a charge for labor, irrigation, and power. And these were the founding, you can say, elements in the planning process of the Indian economy. And he also expressed his views on several policy issues as part of the Bombay Legislative Assembly, as a member of the parliament, and particularly on the issues of water policy, power, uh, uh, and labor. Uh, Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about his earlier thoughts on some problems in India at that point of time, and then move on to how his thoughts changed over time as well. So, the first thing that we come across from his writings, and I must confess, I haven't read his original writings, they are huge. It takes a lifetime to even go through some of his volumes, but I'm depending on secondary analysis of his work here. And at the time of independence, we all know India was extremely poor. Poverty rates were very high, 65, 70%. We were primarily an agrarian society. Most population depended on agriculture, and the farmers were mostly smallholders. Now, his understanding of how to get out of that situation was as follows: that um, because of small land holding, these are unproductive. There's excess labor, but there is less investment of capital. So that your land is excess. Sorry, labor is excess, but land is in short supply in terms of the size of holdings and capital. And then you don't have enough profits and then savings. You cannot invest them, and you are caught in the cycle of rural poverty. And his solution to this problem was basically based on similar to the Lewis model, which you must have studied, which is you have to industrialize. And you have excess capacity of labor in the agrarian sector. And if labor is then moved or siphoned off, as he writes, to build industry, which was required at that time, then the pressure from agriculture goes, productivity increases, and you also have the industrial development. Now, one of his ways he thought of agrarian reforms, which I'll come to later, was legalizing tenancy, giving tenants the legal rights to till the land, uh, and consolidation of land. Land was in small parcels and fragmented. So you must exchange parcels of land and consolidate them. So you have larger parcels to work with. So you can reap benefits of the economies of scale. This is how he started thinking about this problem. Now, we'll come back to this later. This is first his take on this issue. Now, his entry into policy making or planning process starts with his entry into the central cabinet as minister in charge of labor and irrigation and power in 1942, which also coincided with the formation and implementation of the post-war plan. So World War II has ended. India, thankfully, was not part of the war, though the Japanese came till Kohima. We fought the battle at Kohima. The Chinese came, we fought them, lost, but they went back. So there was no destruction. So unlike Europe, where industry was destroyed, bombed, there was a reconstruction plan for Europe. In India, we didn't have a reconstruction plan, but we had a plan which is called a reconstruction plan. But what it essentially meant is that you have to develop industry from scratch. So this was something which the British was still there. So in the British Empire, where the war has happened, they come up with this idea, and so that idea also is part of India. The only thing is that for India, it's just development of industry. We had hardly any industry. And in fact, these plan also, this planning of development, planning of industrialization, how to manage and balance that with agriculture, etc., is the beginning of the systematic economic planning by the central government with an all India perspective, which we have inherited. So, what is Niti Aayog now, or was Planning Commission earlier, with the 5-year plans, taking stock of the country's economic situation, with the large surveys, as all economists know, we have been having these large quinquennial surveys, annual state surveys, and so many surveys, which fed information into our planning process. And the beginning of those planning processes can be traced back to this point of time. Uh, So these planning processes that were instituted not only had an impact on the type of economic planning that India adopted on the eve of independence, but many of these plans continued and became permanent features of India's planned economic development. So that is what I just mentioned, that this became a established norm. No matter which government comes in, you have a planning commission. That planning commission's mandate it is to come with a plan document, which is a 5-year plan, and it's broken down into sub plans, and that is how this process started. And Dr. Ambedkar was right there in this process in the beginning. Um, uh, in addition, he was the president of the policy committee set up to formulate policy and plans for improving the condition of labor, development of irrigation facilities, and electric power, as we know. So he was the president of that committee. So he had the responsibility to create a vision. Why, if we are going to electrify the country, if we are going to do irrigation, if we want to bring in labor laws, what is the guiding principle on which this should be built? Are we going to just copy? Are we just going to copy the Western model, or there are imperatives which are particular to the Indian context? Do we have a history of we have a particular history, we have particular social history which needs to be kept in mind. So all these aspects were part of his vision while doing this planning. So his contribution is there, and I'm not going to go project by project. So there is Damodar Valley project, there's Bhakra Nangal project, and he's contributed to a lot of these. So I'm just giving an overview here. Am I going forward or am I going back? Okay, I think I'm going forward. Now, no, I think I'm going back. Yes. So from the 30s to the 40s, Dr. Ambedkar's view changed to so all what he's thinking of in terms of planning process, he's still not made up his mind whether it's going to be part of the capitalist economy, socialist economy. What are we going to do? How is it going to unfold itself? That he has not thought of, and the inevitable conclusion which probably existed there was that private sector would come in and take over the planning process. This was not clearly enunciated, maybe, or in his writings, at least if I refrain to Ambedkar's writing. But eventually he changed his outlook. And what happened is what I'm going to share. As we go ahead and see his work, he favors more a positive role where the state is the leading player. He favored abolition of feudalistic land tenure system, such as in Maharashtra, we had what is called Maharvatan or a Koti system where particular communities own land, particular communities do not own land, but they get rights to use common land, etc. But which is a feudalistic old form of land tenure system or land usage system. And earlier he thought that through legislation, we should make the tenure. So we had tried land reforms in India even after uh, independence, and he thought that would be the way. Through legislation, why don't you come and sit here? These are empty chairs. Here. So he thought through legislation, the tenure, the worker who works on the land, can be made the owner of the land. But I think he realized that the land reform system is not working. This tenancy system is not going to work. So he advocated cooperative farming long ago. He thought the best way to move forward is that the state owns the land, not individuals, not as private property. The state is the owner of the land, and the people work as a on the land in cooperative farms. So that is one thing which changed in his thinking. Production and distribution of electric power under state ownership and control, which we saw happen. Uh, While he favored this path, these measures were put forth assuming the inevitability of the capitalist organization. So he's thinking of the state in agriculture, he's thinking of the leading role, but some areas it is still being thought that there will be a capitalist organization of things to go. But so because unless you give an alternative, how are you going to negate a particular form? So till now, he's thinking that the state's role is imperative. It is important. It must lead from the beginning. But if but in industry, in power, in other kind of infrastructure being built or developed, the role of the capitalist economy must be there. If not, then what is the alternative? That alternative he has not still thought of. Now we see after, after this, almost 7 years after, or this assertion by him, the first time we find that he makes a clear statement of his political economy intention for India comes in the state and minorities. So state and minorities, he writes as a draft of constitution, which he thinks is a constitution that India needs. Of course, that was debated in the parliament, and only certain parts of that constitution were implemented. So, if you want to really see a radical constitution, you must read Ambedkar's State and Minorities. If you think our constitution is great, you should read State and Minorities. It's even more radical. And in that is the first time he makes a precise statement of an alternative, radical economic and political framework. And that is the economic section of states and minorities documents it and he calls it state socialism. First time he uses this statement of state socialism. It calls for nationalization of key industries such as insurance and of agricultural land, is working working the land on collective farms, with the peasants treated as tenants of the state. So that they are tenants of the state, they are not tenants of any landholder, landlords, or any private ownership of land. That is where he pens it down for the first time. He preferred industrialization of agriculture to lie with the state, a strong role of state in economic planning, and special safeguards against social and economic discrimination of socially deprived classes. And this he makes clear his vision in minority and states. State and minorities, I'm sorry. Now he propounds this idea, and he also gives a justification for it. What is his justification? or state socialism or state being the leading player in India's development trajectory. He reasoned that it was necessary to put an obligation on the state to plan the economic life of the people in a manner so that it not only leads to high productivity on their part, also allowing private enterprise to come in and also provide equitable distribution of wealth. So here the critical thing is equitable distribution of wealth. The plan proposes state ownership in agriculture with collective farming, as I've said, method of cultivation, and modified form of state socialism in the field of industry. Now, it was his opinion that private sector, if it places squarely on the shoulder of the state the obligation to supply necessary capital for industry and agriculture. So he wanted the state to provide the capital, not banks or private banks or lenders, where debt can happen. And you've seen what happened in 2008 in America, Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers, who are basically big capitalists who made money from the cotton trade, which was based on slavery in America. It's a different story altogether. But he wanted state to fund it. Now he was of the opinion that the private sector cannot do it. If it does, it will produce inequalities of wealth. With private capitalism which produced it in the West at that time. So just imagine he's looking at the Western world and he's seeing development, growth, industry being funded by private capital, which is also leading to inequalities, and not even at the scale which we see now. If you see the 1% versus the 99%, the Wall Street, agitation where 4% of Americans have access to 96% of their wealth, which now we have topped that with the new report by the Inequality Lab, where now 1% of our population has access to what, 60% wealth, 70% wealth, I don't know, maybe not less than 40. And he saw this even at that time, that if you leave development growth funding and its processes to the private sector, it will inevitably lead to massive wealth inequalities, which has happened now, which is proved. In fact, as we stand today, we are the most iniquitous country in the world. Within the shortest period possible, within the last 7 years, we have managed to become the most unequal country in the world. Kudos to us. And he saw that. Now, Ambedkar's criticism was mainly drawn from Marx, but on all of it. You can't say he was a Marxist. But what he wrote about Marx in 56, and I quote, is that what remains of Marx is a residue of fire. Marxist fire, the communist project has burned out. What has remained is very little, but it is still important, he thought. And according to him, his takeaway from Marx's thought were these 4 statements which he talks about. That the function of philosophy is to reconstruct the world and not waste its time in explaining the origin of the world. As Marx said, that it's not just important to understand the world, but you have to change it. We analyze, we study economics to understand how this monster of economy called it works. But the idea is to change it so that it benefits the most people in the best way. That there is conflict of interest between class and class. So if you're talking about class and you're not talking about, say, caste, which is more pertinent to the Indian case, there is also antagonism between classes. So the proletariat and the bourgeoisie and the other classes. So it's not free of its antagonism within itself. Private ownership of property brings power to one class and sorrow to another through exploitation. That it is necessary for the good of the society that sorrow be removed by abolition of private property. So he believed that the origin of the source of sorrow, exploitation is private property. When you have ownership of private property, this forest is mine, this land is mine, this mountain is mine, or whatever, then you set the terms of engagement on that property, and you, if you own it, then you feel you're the master of that, and you have the right to set the terms of engagement. It could be labor, it could be the use of natural resources, etc. And by nature, humans are exploitative. They want more. Our aspirations are endless. So private property, inherent in the idea of private property, is exploitation, is what he thought, and a lot of schools of thought believe, especially the Marxist school of thought. So, I mean, I can go on about this. Let me see how much time I have. Sorry? Yeah. Okay. So let me then. So taking from this residue of Marxism, as he says, he agreed that in a social economy based on private enterprise and personal gain, people who are employed or unemployed are required to relinquish their rights in order to earn their living and subject themselves to be governed by private employers. What does this mean? He goes on to explain, and there's a big quote, I'm not bringing it here, is that a poor person who has hunger, who has to feed his family, who has to find medication for his children, education for his children, a roof over their head, is vulnerable, has no power, and will accept the terms of the trade which are given to him or her in a private setting, and will not think of their human rights. They will have to forego their human rights. That I need living wages, not just minimum wages. Uh, Living wages means that I don't only earn enough to feed myself and my 4 family members, but I can educate them well. I can have health insurance for them. I can have enough money to pay for rent if I'm renting in a house, electricity, water, and also money for vacation. This is a living wage, which is you live a good life. The idea of minimum wages is you survive on the margin. When we say minimum wages in India, it is actually coming from that mentality that 2 meals a day and you're on the margin, somehow you scrap through, which itself is extremely problematic, inhuman. So his idea is that private economy, in a private economy where everything is owned by the private agent, the terms of engagement are set by the private agent. People are only recipient of it, these engagements, these terms, and they will relinquish their rights just to feed themselves and take care of their family. He added that it was the opinion of constitutional lawyers. Now he's talking about the constitution, and when laws are set and provisions are made and rights are given by so-called constitutional lawyers. Nehru was a lawyer, Gandhi was a lawyer, people sat and made law, and Ambedkar also was a lawyer. So he said that in the opinion of constitutional lawyers, that the enactment of fundamental rights is enough to safeguard their liberty. If state refrained from intervention in private affairs of economics of the country or social aspect, residue is liberty. So state should withdraw and there should be liberty. But liberty of whom and liberty for what? That was his question. So the constitution makes the laws, gives you fundamental rights, withdraws, and let there be liberty. जिसको जो करना है करे, private enterprise है. But what is this liberty then used for? Obviously, the liberty to the landlords to increase rent, for capitalists to increase hours of work, reduce wages. This must be so, it cannot be otherwise. This is inevitable. This is going to happen. There is no escaping this. This is human nature. This is the beast of capitalism. This is what is called the boom and bust of capitalism. Capitalism destroys itself is because of this inherent tendency of capitalism. In other words, what is liberty from the control of the state is another name for dictatorship. of private employers. So these are his words, not necessarily mine. Some of them most of them I agree with, but times have changed. This is when India has just become independent, but you can see his relevance, his vision. It's as if he's talking about today's time, right? Doesn't seem it is when we were not even born. So that's the genius and greatness of this vision of this man, who was probably the most educated, most visionary person we had, and thank I don't know what for him. If imagine, I shudder to imagine an India without an Ambedkar being there, who didn't write our constitution and it didn't start this planning process. We could have imagined where we could have been or not. Okay, if I can take a little bit of more time, then I'm going to digress a little bit from what Ambedkar talked about to something. I think I have 15 minutes. I can. So we all know that Ambedkar came from the marginalized and depressed classes, especially he was an untouchable Mahar from Maharashtra, and he faced a lot of exclusion and discrimination all his life. So, as an architect of the Constitution, he ensured that the huge tribal, indigenous, aboriginal population of India, the untouchables or the ex-untouchables, if you want to call them that now, uh, uh, got representation through reservation. And if there was no reservation, I'm very sure these people, you would not see them anywhere near you or as your friends, colleagues, etc., because of untouchability. People don't want to sit with them, eat with them, engage with them. So representation, reservation was, without reservation, you would not see this representation. I'm convinced of that. Now, slavery, African American slavery in America, when it was abolished, Lincoln, who abolished it, said that a great harm has been done against these people. The white man went to Africa, abducted, waged a war, abducted people, trafficked them across seas, sold them as chattel slaves, and bonded them as laborers in shackles and chains. This is the greatest crime a human can inflict on another human in a systematic, organized way. So when slavery is abolished, these people must be compensated to start a new life. Because when they are working on the farms of the white man in cotton fields, they have no ownership of land, of any means of production. They just work 16, 17, 18, 24 hours a day and get 2 square meals. That's it. Now, when slavery is abolished and they're free, so called, how do they start their life? They have no means at all. So, Lincoln talked about what was called, the policy was called 40 acres and a mule, which means every family of ex-slave family, African American people of 4 should get 40 acres of land and 1 mule, which is like a donkey or a cross between a horse and a donkey mule, to then start working the land and producing food for themselves, selling. Otherwise, they have no means. However, this never happened. Some land was given to African American families, but it was taken back. So it never really happened. Now, the point is, why did Ambedkar ask for what is this are called reparations for the ex-untouchables and the ex-enslaved? So, if you look at the current ex-population, I think they're 160 million, if I'm not mistaken. And if you look at the diaspora, it comes to 260 million ex-untouchables in the world. Now, it's strange why Ambedkar thought that land reforms or something kind of state socialism will work. However, he never asked for reparations. And that is something which it came up in the constitutional debates. If you look at constitutional debates, there is one Mr. Nagappa who asked this question in the parliament in the constitutional debates, that why shouldn't the Dalits or the Harijans, as they were called, be given, they should be given 40 acres of irrigated land and 20 acres of irrigated land and 40 acres of dry land. And the response from a other person is that who's apparently an upper caste Brahmin, he says, oh, if you're getting land, I will also like to become a Harijan. I don't know whether he meant it or he was mocking him. And then Nagappa responds and says, of course you can get it, Mr. Whoever, but then you have to become a Harijan first. You have to work hard in the fields. You have to clean. You have to do all that, which my ancestors had done for 3,000 years. If you are willing to do that, then you are on the right to get land, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to talk is a little bit about the idea of reparations, which is an issue which has come up, which is happening and coming up uh, quite a lot now. There are lots of reparations being given. So when World War II happened, the Jews who were persecuted by the Nazis got reparations, which is compensation or restitution from the Germans. When Pearl Harbor bombing happened in America by the Japanese empirical forces, the Japanese population of America, there were lots of Japanese living in America at that time who had left Japan and come. They were rounded up that they could be spies, and there was a hatred against them, and they were put in concentration camps. About 40,000 families. They were given reparations of $35,000 each. There are Chile, Peru, Latin American countries where you have dictators and they've killed thousands of people. There have been reparations given. So reparations is not a new idea. It's an old idea. And there are hundreds of cases of reparations. Maori of the Maori indigenous people of New Zealand recently. When the British Crown came to New Zealand, the British people came to New Zealand, there was a pact between the Maori tribes and the Crown that we will share in this land and everything. But of course, over time, the whites have taken over everything. The Maoris are suffering. Thankfully, because of that agreement, there's a clause that the Maoris can ask for compensation. And the Maoris have recently, one tribe of the Maoris has got about $4 million or something as compensation. And there are many cases. So reparation is an old idea. And I was at this consultation or you can say a group of people who came together at Harvard Medical School to create arguments for asking for reparations for different groups across the country, across the world, who have suffered innumerable exploitation historically, and to create a case for reparations for them. So these included, of course, the African American descendants of the slaves in Americas, the African population, in South America due to the apartheid there. The descendants of the Caribbean slave. The Caribbeans was a stopover for slaves being captured from Africa. Also, Caribbeans were the colonies of many of the European nations for plantation economies like sugarcane, plantain, etc. So you had slavery there. The Roma of Europe. I don't know. When I was in college, we used to listen to Gypsy Kings, gypsy music. Have any one of you heard of Gypsy Kings? No, it's before your time, probably. So they were very famous. So the gypsy, if you hear the word gypsy anywhere in popular cinema culture, like some movies of Guy Ritchie, etc., those are the Romani people. And these are the people who left India in the 13th century and went to Europe, and they faced the worst kind of, human exploitation you can imagine. You imagine the worst and anything, and that has happened to them. And they still face a lot of persecution in Europe. Women who are victims of war and crime, the native tribes of America and Canada, who are wrongly called the Indians, but they are Native Americans as they would like to be called. There are about 450 tribes in America, and they have nations. They're sovereign nations. I don't know how many of you we know it. With small reservation lands. Earlier, they were roaming free in North America, but when the settler colonists came, they were relegated to smaller and smaller and smaller areas, and now they are sovereign states, but not really known of. The recent movie which came, The Killing of the Summer Moon, I don't know what is it called, Flower Moon, uh, is based on a tribe, the OJ, who was on a reservation, but they struck oil and they became the richest people in America. But then how the white people again also killed and stole that from them. Leonardo DiCaprio is there, and this indigenous lady is is acting as the lead female artist. She got the Oscar for that. You should see that movie. Congolese people. Congo was the colony of Belgium, and horrible atrocities. You cannot imagine King Leopold's atrocities. So and so forth. There was a guy asking for reparations from SOAS in the UK for Latin and African American countries who have been caught in the debt trap by the IMF and World Bank policies, and so on and so forth. So this compendium of case studies will soon come out, and I'll share with you when it comes out. And all of these are asking for reparations for these communities. Historic wrong has been done for hundreds and thousands of years to these communities. They need to be compensated for the wrong. That is the argument. And if you look at the Indian situation where you have untouchability, you have caste slavery. So I don't know if you know about this, but we had particular caste or subcaste, as we call jatis in India, which are designated as slave caste. So the word paraya, the word English word paraya, uh, I am treated like a pariah. Yeah, pariah in Hindi also comes from the caste paraya, and the pulayas and the chemuras. These are slave castes of south of India, and they have been. So you are born into slavery as this, and there's a lot of work there by Sanal Mohan's book, Modernity of Slavery. You can access that. It's a very good book. So there are thousands and millions of people who have been slaves or near slaves under untouchability till about independence. We might think the British came and abolished slavery. They actually tried to abolish slavery in 1843 by a law called the Anti-Slavery Law. But they never defined slavery. They were very smart. They thought if we come down heavily on Hindu slavery, then we will lose favor with the Indians. They will think Britishers are trying to destroy our culture. So let's go very, tacitly and smartly. So they kind of called an anti-slavery act, but did not define slavery. Whereas the British Empire in 1833, 10 years before they abolished slavery in India, they had abolished slavery in the UK, in England, and its colonies under the abolitionist movement, anti-slavery movement, which is slavery of the African Americans. So the British Empire was complicit in continuing slavery for 10 years till 1843. So if you look at the ex-untouchable population and slave population, they are landless. They don't have rights to own houses, assets, shops. They are denied rights to uh, accumulate wealth. If they accumulate wealth, it is taken away from them or it pains the upper caste. That is what is written in the Manusmriti. No right to education, no civil rights whatsoever. So this is the situation of millions of people at the cusp of independence till untouchability is made an offense or banned legally by the Indian Constitution. Then it is fair to assume that they, uh, at, at the beginning of India's journey, independence journey, they are like completely assetless, no empowerment, educationless, etc., etc., etc. And I have three papers on that, and I can share that argument. made an argument from it. I'm just summarizing it here. You'll have to read the argument to understand why I make that claim. So they had the right to reparations, and then we expect them to compete on merit with everyone else who have a history of education for 3,000 years, for history of land ownership, wealth accumulation, land accumulation, and intergenerational transfer of that wealth. And that's privilege. That's called privilege. It's not merit, it's privilege. And here you have people who don't have any kind of privilege, and they're expected to now compete with you. It's not going to happen. It's just a false narrative. So these people have a right to reparations, and I make that argument for reparations. Uh, Sorry, but what is reparation? So this is the historic timeline which I kind of tried to work on from the Rigvedic period, which is 15,000 BCE, to later Vedic, post-Vedic, early medieval, later medieval, post-medieval, British period, and modern India. This is the history of caste in India. If you have to understand caste, you have to go back and then see what has happened to the people. Have they changed? Have we changed? Are we still entrenched in our caste and our casteist mindset, or we claim to be modern, but are we really modern? Who are we? So you have to read history, and historians have done brilliant work. You should read history also, economic history and other history. And it has taken me 3 years just to understand what available literature is there. And it's going to take another decade to make that argument waterproof, but I'm trying to work on that. Sorry, where is this? So I'm not going to go on in that. That for that I'll have to come back again and give another lecture. But what is reparation? And what is compensation? What is restitution? So compensation is, while sounding similar to both reparation and restitution, in some sense is a little different. It implies merely covering up any loss, harm, or damage that was caused by either a wrongdoing or not. So if a wrongdoing has been done to you, someone comes and burns your house in a riot, you're a bystander, some riot happens in part of Delhi, your house is burned. So the government gives you compensation. It's a wrongdoing. Other is an earthquake comes and your house is destroyed. A flood comes, your house is destroyed. Nobody's done a wrongdoing, but you get compensation. So that is the idea. So if you have to technically define it, is that you go back to the original state before a wrongdoing was done to you. In the sense that something fully compensates a person for a loss if and only if it makes him or her no worse off than he or she would otherwise be. Yeah. So it compensates person X for person's Y's action. So I'm X and my Y person has done an action against me, which is action A, if X is no worse off receiving it. Once I receive the compensation, I'm not worse off than I used to be before person X has committed action A against me. So I go back to being my original state, more or less. Restitution is similar. It's a interesting word. Simply means restoration of something lost or stolen to its rightful owner. It is conditional on separation of something from its rightful owner. So here's an example. I'll come to an example. It, however, does not take for granted always that a wrongdoing has occurred. So it's not necessary that a wrongdoing has occurred, like I was telling in the case of compensation. So, for instance, if A steals B's bike, so one of your friends steals your bike, you don't know that person is your friend or not, or finds your bike, which is lost, and simply returns it back to you without any explanation or expression of remorse or apology, one can say restitution has happened, but not reparation. So you have been restored. Your original belonging is restored to you, your state, you've gone back to your original state, but you don't feel, you think, but someone has done wrong with you. Someone is playing games with you. Someone is trying to taunt you, tease you, torment you, traumatize you by doing this again and again. So you feel that you've got back the bike, but you feel what you've lost as psychologically, you have not been compensated for your psychological loss. And finally, reparation can happen only after any loss or damage has occurred from a wrongdoing. So those two, compensation and restitution, are ideas where something has happened which is done by someone as an act, a wrongdoing or an act of violence against you or not. But reparations specifically pertain to something when someone has wronged. Could be any kind of thing done. So a reparation is a right or a cluster of rights, while restitution is not always a right. So in the above example, if A returns B's bike and also apologizes for the wrongdoing, then one can say reparation has happened, as B now feels that not only has the bike been returned, restituted, but the apology also satisfies her for the emotional distress, and she now feels satisfied. So there's a psychological feeling that this person has apologized to me and this issue is now resolved. So there's a material loss which is compensated for, and there's a psychological, emotional harm which for which there is actually no compensation. But if someone apologizes to you, repents, then you feel okay, yeah, it's fine. I forgive you, and you move on. If you can't forgive someone, you cannot move on. You are always burning, right? That's why they forgive and forget. But how can you forgive unless or forget unless you have been apologized to for the harm, right? Uh, so now this idea of reparations, I think I have taken 52 minutes, so I should stop. I would have liked to talk about where this idea of reparation comes. I'll just say this and stop. And this is not a new idea. You might think this is a new fangled idea, विदेशी idea है ये, कहाँ से ले आते हैं इंडिया में नई नई चीजें. This is John Locke, and he wrote this in 1689. He's a philosopher. John Locke was a philosopher, and the idea of reparation comes from John Locke, and then many other philosophers, and there are many other arguments based on his basic idea, which have been taken, and I don't have time to talk about it. But just to say his basic tenet, so Locke can be credited with being one of the first to propose a cogent argument for reparation. His propositions have formed the basis of blah, blah, blah. He believed that people have natural rights, that they derive directly from natural law. These rights were equal for all, and that people were naturally disposed to live in peace and harmony. I mean, this is his belief. You can say, I don't believe this. People are not like Hobbes thought that Hobbes had an idea that it's a state of nature idea that people live in competition and conflict and chaos. But I don't think that's true. We want peace, harmony, and calm. And that's where Locke comes from. And then he says that if this peace, harmony, and calm is spoiled by someone, then that person has right to reparations from the person who spoiled this peace and harmony. Anyways, I'll stop here and thank you very much for enduring me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such a detailed elaboration on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's ideas and contributions. I'm sure the students are all ready with their doubts. Without further ado, I request the Dipali ma'am to come forward for the question and answer session.
I now request audience to pose their questions sequentially one by one.
Okay. So Ishika would want to go first. Just take the question.
Yes, yes, please. Shiva, just take one question. According to you, what are the major paramount? So Professor Thorat, one is coming from me. It's not a question actually. It's a major thing which I worked over for 3 years almost in my PhD, in my MPhil. So I've always been dicey about this very, the concern of the equality. So what I've seen, I was the part of Ambedkar University, Delhi, where I've done my master, this MPhil in development practices. So I have done the 3 immersions over there. And what I found was that the concept of equality is very, very different among the society's members, right? Some people think that equality is or inequality is merely the subject to the wealth possession, right? Wherein I found one very, the paradoxical fact about it that no matter if you are possessing this land or whatever wealth, it doesn't make any sense unless and until it has some value to it or is it productive to you, right? It's going to keep you at the same place no matter what, right? And I read, Dr. This Amartya Sen's equality of wealth and so on. So I found that it's mostly related with the freedom and liberty and liberty to give the like of thinking to the people and so and so. I find this thing very much conflicting. So how do you think that Ambedkar, from the Ambedkar's point of view, this thing would be addressed? Like how do we really address the contention of equality? That's my question. Not a question. Okay, one is coming from Jyotsna ma'am as well. Any other question from anybody? We are taking it collectively only. I think Shiva wanted to ask something.
around data soon. You asked about quality. I mean, I also knew before the meeting, keep up the labs. I came from this. According to the latest large national data at the All India Revenue Reference Survey there. But my friend who is the data, they may not actually know the data. So, because it was not, the surveys are able to the top one to apply something. So, data I have a very data also. So, we get the data for the four place. Define substantial data from all elements. The four places and the data like Shan. I can look at that. How now the other sources got important as well, clause, look at tax. Again, or that is saying that now we are more an unequal society than we were ever. More an unequal. Definitely is not equality. Or equality was not at. Even higher. 2009. That become worse than this. Right? That 70% of the wealth, the related to the 5, 73% of the wealth, related to 1%. By 20,930 billion is equivalent to a total budget of the central government in 2017. The scale of inequality that we are seeing now is unprecedented in the history of that we have the right to become rich, everyone can become a millionaire. So we have obviously the government's coming in, but you put your mistake and not everyone can become a there's a method you inherit well. And you have to go through a process of a lot of you collect that. So there are a lot of genius ways to become it. A few examples we find someone becomes an idea, like becomes interested and person. Those are very few and far. Systematically, gain wealth is to be on to be outside the organized economy. To believe my ex-professor, Kumar, who got a course and used to talk about black economy, like laugh at it from black economy. Then that went, 10 to 15 years after the demonetization happens, and the only person who has ever done any work in India is Kumar, and he's anywhere on the medicine side. You might remember the right here, it's 5%. And many updates.
62% of India. So when you look at this budget, growth economy, clear economy, all that, completely associated with lack of data. Which body needs to finally, the speech together and come at it. What we different accounting methods, have an estimate or estimate, and what is the next. So, and avoid you not to fall into this trap of thinking that you become rich by hard work and visual idea, startup, and all that. That's pure value. Most of it systematically there are ways of money and because coming in. Next question was asking who make it happy better than economic. Say in childhood that if you are the richest person in seventh generation, you become the poorest person. So the cycle of moving plus become rich and poor happens to everyone all over the world. For that we have a lot of policies against poverty, your PDS, Narega, your right to education, your right to information, your Awas Yojana, Awas Yojana, Atal Awas. So, a lot of policies for poor people. One policy information for minority and SC population. Why is that? So, if you start with a IS officer or a very educated person who's a Dalit or a Radhika, goes to private sector can be excluded and discriminated. The gender and the caste, they are not poor people. They are not poor. Why are you excluded? Why poor people? Was a problem. The social identity doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. Because the visualize the mind of the employer wants to hire you or not. People see shape the motion, immediately visualize. And that doesn't matter, it doesn't look at the poverty or richness of the person. You have to have policy and safeguard counter irrespective of whether you're poor. So you have so many, I mean, Congress and that Congress government into power and state power because of anti-poverty program. But the problem, we have hundreds of anti-poverty programs. We have just one reservation. Why is that such a problem? Like, question. Question on well, like land, you have land and land is not productive and then land is it's about capability, right? Like we should create an environment that anyone is capable of becoming who he or she wants. Education, opportunity, practice, opportunity of job. That opportunity, equal opportunity is not available because there is if we market information skill land and land. May have land, may not have land, may have land, but it may not be productive. But that land is sold. That land, you can keep that land, not be okay. So, that land is not productive. But having a set itself means that not having a set is better rather than not comparison. And if non-productive land is good as not having land, then why not think of non-productive land to be able to have land? I just figure out that situation where you have okay. people to have it. It's not productive when you all people go and let them do what they want. We collectivize their land, create corporations. Let us go animal activity farms. Okay. Idea was, and that's my surprise there. What the land reform would happen for this economy will ensure that the use of landless people with regard to mostly working community will have some access to that. But we did not really go as far as demand particular people, the family, or like, 40% had constitution debate. But I am quite surprised by it. I think it was that once you get education, then everything is good. Then you are accepted. So I like get the skills. That was very good. I see at the same time that people have different that I'm not an expert in that, but I think if anyone talks about women, the first person or Ambedkar, try to change the new law where women do not have any property, secondary citizen, like education, and so many different rights under the new system. And try to bring that change and that the complete was that change. Of course, it was rejected, but some things went through, some things did go through. They were other rights. But even then, they will have to fight it out. I tried to talk to people recently. Yeah, things like that. So, if anyone talk about the rights, constitutionally unique and native in law, enshrining in constitution. I haven't read it. Yeah. Because anyone has to go better about it, that's my experience. So think of this, when you feel the right, last section of it's like why do we need these laws? We have to learn how to teach and laws and how to so all these provisions when they go to the site. The idea was that the people in this society, they not only work, they can afford some people participate. And if they have particular they have to circumvent, right? Then how will they participate? So you have to have a provision for that. There is a provision for that. Pay better. sure he's talked about it and but he was something very no, it's true. Sure, yes, he's talked about it. But I'm not sure that he talked about it in legislation. I'm not sure. I'm asking. But say the relationship. So if a woman is working in a formal sector, then that is explained. Or in the informal sector. Even when it comes to application, comes labor, scan labor, domestic. Domestic project. So if there's I'm sure he has to do. Yeah. And that is what the legislation will take on. So we can't go. Last is so I didn't read the last part of that. Fine. Let's see. Question. So when we talk about arguments, some arguments, many arguments, then spiritual renewal. I read this out. And my compensation and restitution starting point was two regulations. There is also an acceptance of historic right. And what these have a positive chain of events that carry forward and effective and continues the life of the same. Famous audio that famous not have to sports what I'm talking about is more than the companies or past investment, more than a kind of way of hush money or a reluctant right. I'm talking about the national revenue that would be into this that needs to be made a revolution of American consciousness. The conspiring of a self-image, the democratizer, is the facts of our history. Nation like America, nation like India to move on, you have to first accept that what has happened has happened. You cannot deny it. Accept it. And if the wrong has been done, we should apologize. And we're sorry for that. Because we want sensitive to understanding. They don't know. We all start with blaming, right? Justifying the fact that no, we were less discriminated or served or something like false narrative or reverse narrative. And it was very important because how do you start apologizing to people for 3,000 years of industry or thousands of years of operational because we how do we stand by it? That's the big question. Go up as individuals and you become adults. You're free to move, you're free to choose a partner, you're free to make decisions about your life. But who are you? Are you the religion you're born in, the caste you're born in, region you're born in, the language you speak? Who are you? That's critical existential question. These are identities we inherit. We have no choice. There's no choice in what is the religion. Why can't we choose our religion? We are choosing our political parties or our partners. Why do you use Muslim, Christian, Christian, or because we are born in that family and we feel our rights to be the parents and we don't. We fight for it. At the end of the day, we just we have had all our books, we know what our religion says, ideologically, theologically, philosophically. So, just accept our identity. Why? If you are studying economics, political science, thinkers, criticize it, counter criticize it, thinking on it. Why not the attention to who we are? Why am I a Hindu? Look at why am I a Hindu? What is it? Why not dying? So this is what it's a simple question. So there are these are existential questions. It may be not and they will shape the base of the foundation. And you would have religious based on that, you would have supporters based on that, and you would have to live inside that cycle. And kind of have it easier to forget, accept, go on, accept your religion, than to face up to your religion. And I don't think it's difficult. Engagement, intellectual engagement. And also said reservation is like a declaration. No, reservation is allowing participation in government. What if community systematically denies education, sex, wealth accumulation for 3,000 years on some flimsy ideology or some idea, and they oppose it, whether punishment, ostracism, etc. Except that this is the industry. You have to see the knowledge. And I make this argument is that hierarchy in the society. And if you look at our history for about 1,000 years, 2.5, how of the workers, the students, younger workers, agriculture in fact was the domain of relation. The political art was dedicated to state agriculture was developed. So the bulk of working class, the producing surplus, the economist, the surplus then goes to the proprietor, wages to the laborer, the fair share from the labor is not for them. And in fact, what they allow education or education. So there is certain exploration. And then those development culture, capitalism, social capital accumulation, has happened at the cost of people. Then the exploitation down. That is the system.
Thank you, sir, for such a detailed elaboration on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's ideas. I would like to invite our TSC, Jyotsna ma'am, to please say a few words.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this informative sessions. And through this session, and ज़्यादा समय न लेते हुए बस एक दो चीजें कहना चाहूँगी कि if you think about the person who has the 2 PhD in economics from the world-recognized university, one from California, second from London School of Economics, none of them Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. And you don't have the second second example, किसी और की होगी. And the second thing, if we talk about the economic thoughts of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he has an enormous major area in economics: public finance, infrastructure, budget policy, empowerment, development and planning, labor rights, and so many areas. So if the people think he is not an economist, that's a myth in the society. And I want to say the idea, the purpose behind this seminar is to let's acknowledge the Ambedkar's contribution in academics, particularly in economics. So Professor Amit handled this session very beautifully, and he elaborates so many things. So thank you so much, sir. My gratitude to you on the behalf of the university and to the organizing team, and my affection to my students. Thank you so much.
I now hand over the mic to Dipali ma'am for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Shiva. So it's truly an honor to be part of this exceptional event. On behalf of our Honorable Principal Ma'am, staff, I express heartfelt gratitude to our guest of honor, Professor Amit Thorat, for accepting our invitation and generously sharing his time with us. This lecture has been incredibly informative and enriching, inspiring us to approach our academic endeavors with patience and dedication. Thank you, Professor Thorat, for always being generous to the academic community. I would also like to extend our thanks to our TIC, Dr. Jyotsna ma'am, for being incredibly instrumental to organizing this event. IQAC coordinator, Dr. Shubha Sinha ma'am, our senior teachers, our co-conveners of this event, our faculty members, non-teaching staff, and all the organizers and attendees for this efforts to make this lecture a great success. Finally, I would like to thank all of you who are present here for making the time to be with us today and helping us make this event a very grand success. Thank you one and all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Humans are mortal, so are ideas. An idea needs propagation as much as plants need watering. Otherwise, both will die. With this quote by Dr. Ambedkar, I'd like to conclude this event. I wholeheartedly thank our esteemed guest, Dr. Amit Thorat, our principal ma'am, RTIC, Dr. Jyotsna ma'am, teachers, and our co-conveners for this event. I'd also like to thank the students present here. Don't let your ideas wither. Propagate them. Let those ideas be your identity. Let them be immortal. Thank you.
Learning, leader of the ship.